Hi, welcome to Language Center video series on Milestone Texts. William Wordsworth's Preface to Lyrical Ballads. So today I am going to speak about the heartland of Wordsworth's Preface. His theory of poetic language. All of us know this is the part a lot of commentaries have been really showered on. A lot of discussions have been made on. Such an important part and the longest part of the preface. Before we go to the points, a word about what Wordsworth is trying to break away from. The historical context is that of late 18th century or the turn of 19th century. Poetry which he wrote as he intends should deviate from or should create a breakthrough from the then dominant neoclassical traditions. Late 18th century is actually known for neoclassical styles, neoclassical taste and neoclassical sensibility with standard vocabulary, with standard rhyme schemes, with standard diction, with standard styles, everything. And so, in another word, a language modeled on the earlier classical texts, a contrived language which Wordsworth calls as inane phraseology, to quote from Wordsworth. So it is that kind of a language he is trying to break away from. Now, come to Wordsworth's points. What kind of a language he aims at? We have already found in the explanation of the experimental aspect of these poems. He said he aimed at the use of rural language, the language really used by men in rural situations. That's what he aimed at. But he chose the language of ordinary people in the village with three qualifications, not as such. Which are the conditions? One, the language used by people when they are excited, when they are in a state of vivid sensation, to quote from him, vivid sensation. So, in such a mood of excitement, in such an experience of excitement, what kind of a language they use, that language is taken, number one. Second qualification, that language again is not used as such, only a selection from that language. That means unwanted elements are removed and so the finer part is used. And then thirdly, even that is still arranged in a certain particular way, arranged in meter. That means verse is used by him, rhythm is used by him. So, a selection from the real language of men is arranged in meter and that language is used by him. Why? This is the explication that we have to see now. First of all, don't misunderstand. It is not simply for the sake that people should understand, ordinary people should understand. That is not the reason. It is not a concessional decision. He chose rustic language because he thought that is the best language on a lot of grounds. In fact, he gives us in preface, he gives us 10 reasons why rustic language is to be chosen for poems. We shall see them one by one. The first two have already been mentioned when he stated the object. That is, the villagers, the rural people frequently and continuously communicate with the best objects of nature. And it is as a result of this interaction with the best objects of nature that the best part of language is originally derived. That's his view. And so, it is a serious theoretical proposition even though it doesn't appear to be so. A casual looking statement but with larger implications, playing for larger stakes. He says the best language is the language derived as a result of people's interaction with nature, natural objects, which are far more permanent than anything made by people. Lakes, mountains, valleys, groves, sea, river, lake, whatnot. Coleridge objects later, we will see that in biography. Education is needed, Coleridge says, not simply interaction with nature for the best part of language. But Wordsworth's point is that. And then, secondly, there is another point. It is the rural people who get the opportunity to interact with the best objects of nature. Coleridge raises question to that also. How can you say that? If one person lives in a rural situation or in a village, is it a reason to believe that that person interacts constantly with nature? Interaction is something that the person also has a role. The agency of the person also matters. So how can you say that simply by the location of the life a person is sure to have interacted with nature? So that's a question. I just mentioned the point of Wordsworth, and I mentioned two objections raised by Coleridge against this. Anyway, that is the first point of view. Okay, rural people hourly communicate with best objects of nature, permanent objects of nature, and it is as a result of this kind of a deal that better part of the language has always been derived. That's number one. Now, reason number two that also was stated, that is, rustic people's language is far more durable. That is his point. It is a permanent kind of language. It is also a philosophical language, more philosophical than the contrived family language of poets. Why? There is a reason also. The rustic people are simple in their manners, and their expressions are not curtailed by artificial sophistications of man-made culture. And in an urban society, it may be. So, rural people's language develops spontaneously out of the requirements of the rural occupations, and also, more importantly than that, from the elementary feelings of people. Elementary means it is lasting also. They are lasting. These elementary feelings, as they are elementary, they will be lasting also. So, language organically derived from our elementary feelings and the essential nature of the rural occupation. Such a language is a language of permanence. It is not simply a passing show. That is his second reason for the choice of rustic language. Now, a third one, actually a very informing part in the preface. He asked the question, is there any relationship between a contrived diction and the quality of poem? Very often people misbelieve or they mistake. If we use ordinary people's language in literary works or in poetry, that may cause a kind of degradation of standard. Value, quality will go down. This is the anxiety. And is there any real, genuine, rational ground for this apprehension? Wordsworth says it is absolutely baseless, because there is no relation whatsoever between an artificial diction and quality. Quality is completely another thing. He also says, how can you ensure quality to poetry? There are two things. One, the presence of a worthy purpose. Second, the power or the ability to excite emotions without using gross and violent stimulants. These are in fact two factors that serve to guarantee quality. That needs to be explained. He himself explains. What does he mean? Worthy purpose. Second, the ability to excite emotions without gross and violent stimulants. Especially the first point may seem to be a little self-contradictory or self-defeating, because Wordsworth is a poet who tries to expound an organic theory of poetry. And then the same person says there should be a worthy purpose. So does it mean that the poet has to write purposely? That's a question. That means before a poet writes, should he think and articulate a certain particular purpose and then he writes in this artificial engineering way? Should he write? Such an idea will be quite contrary to what Wordsworth has been trying to establish. But Wordsworth says that fear is not properly grounded. There is no contradiction between these two. Here Wordsworth first of all pronounces that most celebrated definition of poetry. No doubt poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Only this much he says here, that recollection part comes only later. So he says, for all good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And then how can it be with a worthy purpose? Certainly, Wordsworth says, if you are a person of reflective habit, naturally your mind will be associated with ideas, thoughts. So the presence of emotions spontaneously does not mean the absence of thought. Thought and feelings in Wordsworth's theory, in Wordsworth's conceptual world, these two things are never mutually exclusive or mutually contradictory. If thoughts are there, emotions are also there. They coexist without contradiction. Thought and feelings. So, it's only a matter of habitual automatization. That means at the beginning, suppose you let your mind go free, you may not feel like thinking very serious things or worthy ideas. True. But you train your mind today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow. Like that, in a due course of time, what happens is that even if you permit your mind to go free without any artificiality, that may land up on something noble or something worthy or something valuable. So this is becoming an automatized process. No effort is to be needed. And in such a condition, even the most spontaneous expression will automatically carry an idea that is worthy, because your mind is already set like that. So this is actually the state of a poet's creativity, or in this stature creativity happens. And so in such a level, even the most spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings carries a noble, worthy purpose. The idea is great. So that is actually the basic point if we put it in simple terms. It is not the artificiality of language. It is not the use of a family language of poets that guarantees the quality of poems. Instead, poems should have a basic, noble, worthy idea in it. The content is what matters, basically. That is the first point. Second point, that's far more important, as I feel. What makes a poem superior is whether or not it uses gross and violent stimulants. The capacity of an artist, the stature of an artist is augmented in proportion to the power to excite emotions without using violent stimulants. I will just take one example from popular medium, I think film, for example, movie. Suppose you are presenting a negative or a villain character in a movie and you want your audience to hate him. Then how can you do that? You can excite this feeling or emotion of hatred by making your villain do all sorts of brutalities, all sorts of heinous actions in front of the eyes of the audience. Certainly he kills, he burns, he rapes, and all sorts of heinous, unthinkable crimes are done, and then definitely people will feel a kind of aversion, hatred towards that. Here, the emotion is excited using very gross, violent stimulants. Superior artists have the quality, have the ability not to use them. At the same time, the same amount of hatred or the same emotional excitement can be evoked in the minds of the audience, in the minds of the readers, without using any of these gross, violent stimulants. And there lies the ability, the superiority of the artist. A usual example suggests itself. Again, a very familiar, universally acclaimed movie. An Indian movie this time I take. Pathir Panchali by Satyajit Ray. The most emotionally overwhelming scene in Pathir Panchali is that of the father coming to the house after his daughter's death, and then the union of the mother and the father, and he is asking for her to offer a sari which he has brought. That's actually an emotionally overwhelming situation, a poignant, packed, sentimental situation. Here, actually, the sadness is evoked. All the pain of the situation is brought to the audience, not by the loud outcry of people or not by the outrageous behavior, but by the judicious use of background score, a musical instrument. So that's enough actually to make audience weep or audience cry. There is no need of any gross kind of stimulants. What I am saying is that Wordsworth emphasizes this point. So, whether a poet is able to excite emotions without violent stimulants, that is the question about quality. If these two are okay, if there is a worthy purpose and if the poem is capable of evoking emotions without any such undesirable things or cruel things or violent things, the quality of the poem is ensured. It is refined in both ways, both the content and the presentation wise. It becomes very refined, and that is how the quality of the poem can be maintained, and you need not take a kind of inane, dead language for that purpose. This is the third point, the third reason. So the point is this: diction and quality have nothing to do with each other. So nothing will happen to poetry if diction is avoided. That's the point. And now to the fourth reason, and that's also a very important one. Wordsworth's purpose is to make the reader experience the pleasure of a shared feeling. That means the poetic experience should not be the result of a display of a peculiar kind of skill. It is not a circus. It's not a magic. Poetry evokes the pleasure of shared experience. That means the readers have to connect. People have to connect. Human beings have to connect. And this connection is based on the truth of experience. So, The task of the poet is to present the real emotions and the reality of emotions. Diction simply is falsehood. So it is to be avoided. It's not simply a personal choice, it is undesirable because it spoils the reality and the truth of poetry. That is his fourth reason for rejection of diction. So here actually Wordsworth is trying to introduce a vision which we can cite as the starting point of a new era in aesthetics, especially in European history of literature and poetry. A people-oriented view of poetry, I say. The poet is to be accepted by the people. Poem is to be accepted by the people, not because of anything strange in it, not because of any unfamiliar skills displayed, but because of a shared feeling, a shared emotion expressed cleanly in it. So, diction is an obstacle in this prose. That is the fourth reason. And now, the fifth one. That's also another important one, another most discussed part. It says, often diction like things are justified because people think prose and poetry are qualitatively different things. Wordsworth finds this idea baseless. To quote from him, he says, there is no essential difference between the language of prose and that of poetry. So, will you permit diction in your prose? When you are writing an article, when you are writing a treatise, when you are writing or when you are speaking to a person, when you exchange in language in prose, do you use diction? No. And then when you write poem, the same person insists because there is a wrong perception that the language of poetry is something very special and it is essentially different from the language of prose. Wordsworth dismisses such a notion. He says there is no essential difference. Remember, his word is not that there is no difference, but there is no essential difference. There may be differences, but those differences are only differences in degree, not differences in kind. That's the basic point. Means the emotions the poet is trying to present are human emotions. It is not celestial. The blood and flesh of poetry are the blood and flesh of human beings. There is no divine ichor flowing through the veins of the poet. In his own words, I'm just quoting. So, essentially, human emotions and emotions of poetry are the same, and our ordinary language in prose and our language in poetry are also the same in their essence. That's the point. So there is no essential difference between these two things. And so, diction would be falsehood not only in description but in the very content also. This is the fifth point. Now, I am stopping here in this video because actually 5 more points we have to say, and those points will be given in another video which will be uploaded soon. So Bear with me. Wait for us. Thank you for watching.